bakani korto mochari ni de bakan mawo ko ko basara bije mi ingilisi je geni bakan mo ngeni ni ngita la pigara ya du korara bi ingilisi tu wadu mon pilai taskelia basra ko tu mon gesimu mon Italian baso fi ma akuto wadi fi Italian tan manu wazazi to mon pibe nas mama to mon baba mar bakan mon pogo ya English bibu mon pi Misiri gesi mo mon Italian kila nas Italian kudan mo lisa yala mo rabade paskeria ya wedu mon pi Misiri ya bakan wedu mon pi Misiri mon gen pi Misiri na la du mon alim kazi taskeria kulu pi Misiri bas ya dakalu mon pi meli mon guro kismayo asedi mungura kismayo modu mon memeli mpaka Mombasa bakan mo mpika Mombasa gesi mumon monda kismayo wadiro fi Zanzibar wadiro fi Onte ugoben fi Sirale bas wadin fi Zanzibar wadini na fi Shomali na monda dukman ta Shomali kalas mon wa bijan ya sede monar ge jetala minna kalas baka dukman ta Somal line kalas ya sede dibu mon
The only visible link between the British and the Nubians is the Kibra Primary School. This school was a gift by the colonial government to the Nubians in recognition of their services to the British Empire.
Came across a document written written in June the year 2002 by John Barrier in the East Africa, which stated that which was under the title "Meet the Nubians, Kenyan's fifth generation foreigner." Now, this discussion, the discussion under that headline, depicted that Nubians, irrespective of having been in this country for over a century, they have and still remain foreigners in the eyes of the government and in the eyes of the Kenyans. And what are the factors? What are the reasons behind this? Now, to explore this, we will have to look at the history of the Nubian people in East Africa and in Kenya particular. Then look at the relationship between Kenyans and Nubians in its from a historical perspective and current position. And lastly, we'll be looking at the question of the Nubians and the relationship in participation in government decision making. First, the Nubians in East Africa are aborigines of the Nuba Mountains and the Nubia areas of the Sudan and the southern Egypt. This is not a homogeneous ethnic community, but a constellation of different communities brought together because of their culture, brought together because of a religion, brought together because of the history that they've had, and the service they undertook in the military, both for the Turkish and the British government, and subsequently has formed a community of people who shares a lot from their background and the history of the present and their past. As a result of that, Nubians found themselves in territory new to them, away from most of their community. Unfortunately, with that kind of arrangement, the Nubians were never offered permanent residence in those areas. Most of them, and those ones who have had land, were either on temporary occupational license, or Nubians who remain there have remained in the land for centuries without entitlement. And that's where the problem of a place like Kibra begins from. Because by 1902, Nubians were already settled in Kibra, but without entitlement. And therefore it meant that Nubians who kept on living here, believing that this place belongs to them, but at the same time, the British, on the other hand, did not have any kind of arrangement as to permanent settlement. And therefore, it began a process of conflict between the Nubians and the government. Until 1933, during the Carter Commission review, where Nubians put up a very strong case as to why they must have Kibra. The conclusion of that recommended that in the Carter Commission that since Nubians had done a great service to the Queen and in colonizing East Africa, they were to be left alone in this area. And if they were to be repatriated, they were to be repatriated under certain conditions and terms. As a result of that one, the Nubian elders, realizing that they were going to have problems with different authorities, they opted to write to the then the head of the mission in Kenya, or the governor, with regard to repatriating them to Sudan. Unfortunately, the governor responded by telling them the government in Sudan would not accept the Nubians, and therefore their place is Kibra. And from then, it was a foregone conclusion that Kibra is the best place for the Nubians, and therefore they remain in it. But with this kind of arrangement, where there are no legal papers, where there are no declaration as to on what relationship and how people are going to be relating to one another, it forced Nubians to have a relationship that is unprocedural with the government. Subsequent to that one, all the independent governments have all assumed that the land in Kibra belongs to them, belongs to the government, and on the other side, the Nubians believe that the land belongs to them, owing and on the basis of the Carter Commission of 1933. And therefore, we have a protracted kind of debate or argument between the government on one side and a community on one side. That over a period, Kibra has become a place where political and ethnic dominance is characterized and built in Nairobi. Between 1969 and 1974, many migrants into Kibra were Kikuyus, literally ferried from other areas to come and settle in Kibra. And as a result of that kind of settlement, the only Nubian leader who was then the only leader who had hailed from the Nubian community was voted out on the basis of the migrants who had come in and voted in a Kikuyu leader. Subsequent to that one, all other leaders who have been here, who have hailed from the areas where Kibra is, have had to have their community dominate this area, if not on individual basis, but in groups of communities that have their linkages together. So therefore, it means that the participation of the Nubians in decision making and subsequently in even nominating or electing members to parliament and to the civil authority has dwindled to an extent that for the last 20 years there's been no representation of Nubians or any person of a Nubian origin into government or into places in political sphere, and brings a very huge question. How can people who own part of an area not participate in a decision making on the development of this area? Little wonder, Kibera as it is today is the most undeveloped area, the most congested area in East Africa, and perhaps in Africa, as it's being alluded to, and the most ungovernable place, because the people who govern the area have no idea, do not share common identity, and even do not share the sympathy and even the history of the area with the people who live in it. The issue of ethnic dominance and the conflict that keeps on emerging between some of the communities and the Nubians. Recently, so the year 2000, as way back in the year 2001, the issue of rent, which has become now the only business that the Nubians can do, the rent and the rent issue has been in the public domain to the effect that the members of the leaders of these areas are insisting that most of the rents here should be reduced. But the net effect is that it is the Nubians who become directly affected with every decrease of reduction of the rent. The Nubians get affected. Now, this has resulted into two major conflicts. One in the 1994-95, and the second one in the year 2000. And the ethnic identity and the ethnic dominance that is being perpetrated by politicians keeps on glaring its face on the surface. And those who face the brunt are normally the Nubians, because they, being a minority within this area, have to keep their stand and have to fight for their right against dominant communities and who have some backing from both civil and the national authority. As a result, it has meant that Nubians do not trust the rest of other communities in this area and do not find it comfortable discussing or deliberating any issues with people who do not share the history and identity of a place like Kibera.
Asedi bakana na naso gode wapangaji megilipa kodi gali wede turete serikali
ajijua kelipa shilingi miteni
Shilingi mitende abagerwa sasa.
hajana kulipa kodi tabilipa shilingi miteni wata yominda khalas ata man dakhal fi juwa tena altalagere man ma julipa kulu talagere mon da man ma gilipa malipa tata shida.
The question of Nubian identity has been one of the question that has been used and played around. From my research, it shows that it has been used extensively by different leaders in East Africa to perpetrate and to move on certain kind of ideology. Since the coming of the British, the Nubians were isolated from the rest of the East African community members, and therefore they they were granted certain plots and certain areas of habitation, which were not to be interfered with by indigenous communities, and which were like a buffer, acting as buffer zone between the indigenous community and the foreigners, in this particular case, the British. To the effect that as early as early as 1900, some of the indigenous communities were so they were so hateful of the Nubians in the manner in which they operated for the British, because all Africans regarded anybody with a black skin to have been on their part. But to find that people of the Nubian descent acting and working for the British was really preposterous to the indigenous. Therefore, the issue of Nubians being regarded as foreigners and being labeled, the feeling of xenophobia being expressed towards them began as early as 1900. And therefore, it made the question of their identity separate from the rest of the indigenous community. And the fact that the British never nationalized the Nubians, it even made the situation worse, because after independence, the Nubians became the target of vilification and tacit, or let's say covert, racism and xenophobia. Now, you could find that for those Nubians who managed to succeed in the early days of independence and worked for the government, majority had to hide their identity, either by claiming to be members of other indigenous communities in East Africa and in Kenya in particular, or they had to change their names to suit certain conditions to be able to be employed. The relationship between government and the Nubians is well defined, in that very few Nubians can attain and even work comfortably within the services of government. Actually, the problem of the Nubians' problem is not a general problem with other communities. The Nubian problem is with the government, mostly with the government. But to build onto to build onto the confusion, the government try as much as possible to portray Nubians as foreigners. And as a result, other communities start questioning, how can foreigners own property and land, in particular in Kenya? Because according to other communities, they can't believe that a community of black people or whatever can own property. In fact, the linkage between Nubians and the British is only known to the government. But the rest of the Kenyans hardly know that there are linkage. They only see Nubians are there doing their own daily activities without realizing that linkage. The biggest problem with the Nubians have is not with the other communities. It is mostly with the government. And since government officials and political leaders know that there's that problem, they always use it to their advantage by inciting their members of communities to begin fighting or conflicting with Nubians. Over a period of time, people have been subjected to this kind of humiliation. We have youth who do not have identity card. For example, I will give you my own stories. I have two brothers. One is 25 years old, the other one is 21 years. Both do not have identity cards. And in Kenya, identity card means everything. It is your entry towards getting to school, to higher education. It is your entry towards getting a job. You will never be employed. You will not even get a driver's license if you do not have a Kenyan identity card. And therefore, it perpetuates, you are designed to be poor. You are designed into a position of hopelessness and without working, without a job, because you cannot get an identity card. It's even worse that when it comes to passport, And therefore, it has meant that many of Nubian youth stay home, do nothing, but try to do very menial jobs, because those are the ones that they can attain, because they don't require identity cards or even passport. But for those ones who have had, majority have had to leave the country to go and work elsewhere, because they cannot get similar jobs here in this country.
In 1969, a Nubian by the name of Yunus Ali was elected the MP for the area, and what gave him the impetus was the Nubian vote. So during the 1974 elections, or just before the 1974 elections, some politicians, with connivance from the administration, which is a government hand, the local administration, started giving land or letting a lot of other non-Nubians build around Kibra. And the people who were mostly imported at that time were the Kikuyu, because they were being prepared to vote for one Mwangi Masai, who, because of the influx of non-Nubians, managed to beat Yunus Ali at the 1974 elections. So it was a strength in numbers. They brought in quite a lot of people, and this went on for quite a while. Then the government again aided and abetted that, because for international purposes they wanted to oust Mwangi Masai and bring in Philip Liki. And because now Philip Liki was brought in and there was no other candidate other than the Nubian and the Kikuyu contesting the seat, then they also brought in the Luos and the Luyas. You can see the evolution of that influx now. The Luos and the Luyas now came in, and instead of Kibra becoming Kibra for the Nubians, it now became quite a cosmopolitan area, with people coming in from the coast and everywhere. And here I would also add that although Kibra is referred to as a slum, it is not a slum in the ordinary sense of the word. It is a slum that was actually government aided. Why do I say that? I am sure you've taken photographs of the areas in Kibra, and of all the buildings you have seen, let me tell you that none was built without approval by the district officer's office, and that is the government office. So who actually contributed to the making of Kibra a slum? It's the government, and it had a very big hand in doing that.